mode.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. This is Mallory Wood, Director of Marketing at mStoner, and I am so excited to welcome you to our webinar today, 2001, A Web Odyssey. So first, let's do a quick audio check. There is just no point in continuing until you can. So if you don't mind, oh good, Daniel's been here before. He's already got his hand raised. If you can hear me, use the raise your hand feature or just shoot me a tweet at Mallory Wood. Through some hands being raised. Thank you, Rachel. Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Chris and Chelsea and Barbara. Perfect. All right. I'm going to put your hands back down. And Craig, thanks for tweeting me. Okay, this is great. You can hear us. Let's get moving. We have a few housekeeping details. During the webinar, you can use the chat feature to ask questions. We've saved time at the end for Q&A, and we'll make sure that we answer every question before we sign off. So if that means we have to go, 5 or 10 minutes over, we will stick around and do that to make sure your questions get answered. You can also verbally ask questions. So what you would do is during Q&A, raise your hand just like you just did to indicate that you can hear me. And when the time comes, I will announce that it's your turn. I'll unmute you, and you can actually verbally ask your question over your telephone or your mic and speaker. You can also tweet questions. Today we're using the hashtag mStonerNow. Like I said, my Twitter handle is @MalloryWood. So join me in the back channel while you're watching this session and tweet me your questions. We will be recording the webinar, and it will be available on the mStoner blog and on our YouTube channel later this month. Because you all registered and you're attending today's session, we're actually going to give you early access to the recording before we make it public. So sometime midweek next week, we will send you a link with the slides and this recording. So you'll be able to access that before everyone else can. And I'd also like to just take a quick moment to plug a webinar we're doing next week. Actually, the month of November, we have 3 webinars, which is really awesome. This is the first. Next week, we're doing a webinar called Making Smart Decisions Using Web Analytics. Nick Denardis, the Director of Digital Communications at Wayne State University, is presenting this session again. It's actually one that we did just a couple of weeks ago. And due to the high popularity of the webinar last month, we are choosing to offer it again next week. So the session is jam-packed with case studies that showcase how analytics were used to make smart decisions for both design and on the web. And so I will shoot out a link through the GoToWebinar control panel in the chat, so you can learn more if you're interested in that. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm really thrilled to introduce today's presenters. Sarah Eva Monroe, more than 10 years of digital creative, and her career in higher ed spans 3 institutions: the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and she's held a variety of positions, including and digital marketing lead. And Sarah Eve is actually also an alumna of Obama's 2012 digital team. And then you can see her on your screen. We also have Rachel Horman with us today. She's the executive director of University Web Communications at Tulane University. And in that position, she's led web content and design strategy for over 13 years. So she and her staff manage top-level pages, Tulane's content management system, and they support all manners of electronic communication from social media to PowerPoint. So during today's session, remember, hashtag mStonerNow. You can also tweet Sarah Eva at Sarah Eva. And Rachel, Sarah Eva, I've talked more than enough, so let's turn this session over to you and get started.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Mallory, and thanks, Rachel, for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here. Hi, everyone.
So I want to talk a little bit about the genesis for this webinar. The reason that we are talking about 2001 to 2013, just kind of an odd span of years, 12 years, is because I started my first job as a web professional working for Rachel. Rachel was my first boss after college, and we worked together in creating content and managing Tulane.edu. So I thought it would be really interesting to kind of take a look at what's changed over the past 12 years and to reconnect with Rachel and understand how things at tulane.edu have changed over that span of time. So we're excited to get started. See, first I want to slide we have about mStoner, so I'm just going to go through it fairly quickly. We also have 12 years of web-first branding and marketing for institutions. And when I talked to Michael Stoner about this presentation, he wanted me to make sure to note that mStoner also began in 2001. So another milestone for web design in 2001. So we have hundreds of clients, but here are just a few: Harvard, Yale, University of Miami, Columbia, College of William and Mary, and Fordham. And as you can read, we do a good job for our clients. We really offer a variety of services, and if you have any questions about the types of services we offer, Mallory is your girl. So feel free to reach out to her if you have any questions about us or what we do, if you're not as familiar with mStoner as others who may be on the webinar. Okay, so let's jump into the content here. So what we're going to cover. We're going to cover the internet in 2013, and specifically we're going to talk about what's changed in terms of user expectations and user behavior. That will also touch on the types of tools people are used to use and as well as using now, and as you might imagine, devices are a big part of that. We will touch on current best practices in user interfaces and design, as well as some aspects of content strategy. And what Rachel is going to contribute throughout this is some case studies or kind of anecdotes about her experience at being at the same institution during this span of time and seeing how things have changed. And then after that, we'll have time for questions. Okay, so we're going to start out with the idea that even getting online and connecting to the internet used to be a big deal. And I want to show just a short video here. Mallory, I'm assuming we have audio?
Hi, sorry about that. I was on mute, and I was talking to you as if you could hear me. We actually don't have audio, so I'm wondering if that's coming out of your computer speakers there, Eva. You're going to have to hold up your whatever you're talking into in order to hear it. Or what we can do is tweet out and send a link out to this video, and we can see it, but we just can't hear it.
Yeah, let's do that. As you can see from the production quality and the machines that they're showing in this video, this is the early days of the internet, and they're talking about kind of the first usages for the internet, the idea that you can communicate with people who live anywhere in the world just by typing on your own machine. So we can skip watching this entire video and you guys can go back to it, but it reminded me exactly how revolutionary the internet was back in the day. And just the idea that this is an employee of Wired, and they show the Wired offices, and it's just amazing. They have huge beige monitors, and there you go, beige keyboards. It's a pretty good throwback. So check that out. But anyway, what we want to establish here is that getting online used to be a big deal. And web design was limited. It was limited by tools, essentially. And as I talked about it up front, that was related to machines, devices, bandwidth, all of those things. So let's jump right in. So display resolution. Just to define resolution, it's the number of distinct pixels that can be displayed. So the idea is that each display that you're looking at, whether on any device, has a certain number of pixels. So now we see Retina displays on Apple devices, and those actually have a much higher, the image appears very clear and very, very sharp. Whereas on a device with a lower resolution, that same image might appear very fuzzy. So in 2001, the most common resolution was 800 by 600. And y'all probably remember monitors that looked like this. You may still have a monitor that looks somewhat like this, but what's likely most very improved from back in the day is that the resolution is much higher. Here, as you can even see in this image, pixels are visible. It was very hard on the eyes. It wasn't great for graphics or design because everything had kind of a bitmapped appearance and was very rough. So here's a graph that's actually going from now in reverse to 2002. So you'll see that 800 by 600 was a very popular resolution, and that's gone way down. And now resolutions higher than 1024 by 768 are the most popular, which means that there's just more canvas to play with, which is great for designers, it's great for content publishers, and it really allows for a much higher level of design on the internet. So next we'll talk about colors. So here in the upper right-hand corner, what you're seeing is the 256 web-safe colors that we used to be used to. And so this was a limitation of graphics cards as well as bandwidth that was needed to show more than these 256 colors. So 256 may seem like a lot, but as you all probably experienced, if you have a certain Pantone color that was your brand color and you needed to match it on the web, it was very tricky to find something that worked within these 256 colors. So you ended up with maybe Columbia University's blue that actually looked very, very periwinkle or almost purple in different browsers and on different devices. So it wasn't ideal. And even though technically there were more colors available, as you can see from this chart, again, moving from current times back in the day, there were about 65,000 colors available on most graphics cards by the time folks were accessing the internet in 2001. But still, most best practices said try to be web safe, especially if color is very important to you. So a good example of this is from the Wayback Machine. This is Pantone. And of course, Pantone is famous for owning color. You know, they define color. And here you can see that they really are using a palette directly out of those 256 colors. Some other things I wanted to highlight here that I'd forgotten about back from 2001 is the idea that that a site would actually have kind of a credits, what types of hardware and software they use, and specifically right here, this site is optimized for certain browsers. And if it doesn't look right on your browser, please upgrade. And that's something you don't see as much anymore. We are much more about meeting the user where they are now, instead of saying you need to upgrade or you need a better piece of software in order to view our site. So that's one kind of large thematic change that's happened over the years. So to answer one of the questions I set out at the beginning, do you still need to choose web-safe colors? No. You have millions of colors to choose from, and almost any color that you choose will display correctly on the vast majority of devices. So let's tools then and now. So as you can see, this is a chart of their popularity throughout the years. So all time, Internet Explorer actually has the greatest share of market, with Firefox and Chrome coming up behind that. What you see here is that Internet Explorer, however, and now this is moving from the past to the future now, is actually greatly declining in its popularity. And Chrome is really is much more popular. A lot of that has to do with its native integration as a Google product with your Gmail account, with your Google account. And it also does a really good job of adopting forward-thinking technologies. And so sites look better in Chrome and in Firefox than they do in Internet Explorer. And this is something that most web designers are pretty familiar with. So Rachel, are you, I know that you have been designing and browser testing since the days of Netscape, which didn't even really make it on. Are there different things that you think about than you used to?
Come into play as well, because
Mm-hmm.
a page can and not just because of basically what it means is that we used to. It's not more important now, but it is a bigger chunk of our budgeted time for a project.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And so I want to talk a little bit more about what's behind the differences in how each browser displays content. So what is behind that is actually the rendering engine. And that's what actually is basically the translator between the code and the front-end user interface. And so what happens is that each browser gets to choose what they do and don't support. And so some of the newer, cooler things like HTML5 animation and all of that, Internet Explorer, especially older versions, it just doesn't support it. They just choose not to translate that. And so the website doesn't actually, isn't able to show those aspects of itself because basically the browser makes. This is why choosing a browser is something that didn't used to be as important as it is now. Because now, if you're still using Internet Explorer, and they're definitely catching up, but a few years ago, Internet Explorer was just kind of on on the bad list in terms of how designers were wanting their designs to display, because it would break these really beautiful designs that would look great in Firefox and great in Chrome, and also other browsers like Opera. And so this information here just kind of tells you a little bit about how browsers as a tool actually impacted design and continue to impact design, because it really is up to those browser manufacturers to decide what are the things that they'll translate. So I want to talk just a little bit about bandwidth. So Jacob Nielsen, who is of course a usability expert who has been at the forefront of thought leadership in terms of usability for a very long time, he estimated, according to his research, that pages that took any longer than 10 seconds to load would frustrate the user. Now this was in 2001. So I want to just illustrate, given our current tolerance, here's what 10 seconds feels like. So although we're not in the same space, I can imagine frustrated or impatient during that time. 10 seconds feels like a very long time. And if you're waiting for something to download or for a page to actually draw itself, it's too long now because our level of patience has changed. And back then, because it was such a new and novel thing, we really didn't mind waiting. And I actually remember, this is probably before Rachel's time at Tulane, but I remember learning where my residence hall was and downloading what was probably maybe a 1 megabyte map on my computer at home. And I literally set it to load and download, and I went away and came back and checked on it. And it took maybe half an hour for the entire map to download. But I was so thrilled because I could see where look at the map of the campus and imagine being there. So I think it's safe to say, as a prospective student, I was a little bit less high maintenance than current students now in terms of what they expect to learn about their campus. But I think it's really interesting as a way to illustrate has just dropped over the past 12 years. So despite these limitations, the internet did change daily life. So here's a press release from Stanford doing some research about how the internet is changing daily life. And actually, before I saw the date on this, I thought that this could be a recent article, and it really could be. We've been talking about this for a long time, that we use the internet more and more. It's very engaging. It takes us away from face-to-face interaction, and our expectations over time have changed. But even here at the very beginning, folks were still really highly engaged. So just a little bit of context, internet adoption. So by 2001, about 53% of adults in the US were using the internet. So it's nowhere near the adoption rates that we have now, but it was still a fairly large percentage. So we've talked a lot about how the internet was built and how different things were determined, but let's take a look at what it actually looked like. And in my research for this webinar, I found a shocking number of sites that appear not to have been updated since then. So here's a good example of one. So this is a site that that is actually a lesson for how to use the web. And similarly to that video that I started with, we really did need a lot of instruction at the beginning. We needed a lot of help and a lot of wayfinding in terms of how to actually use a website and use the internet. So it talks about disks, it talks about, all kinds of things. There's some really great things here that I forgot were convention. So last updated, that's, it looks like this was last updated in 2012, but she's kept this archive up. So it's really, really helpful to see this. So this is another thing. Want a local copy with no ads. Download these files onto a CD. You don't see any websites doing that these days. Also, icons, which are, again, a kind of a navigability aspect that we continue to do these days, but this is a little bit more old school. And then this kind of interesting outline type of navigation, and also copious use of tables. So one thing I think is kind of interesting here is that this is actually a full-page website, though. This is using the entire browser, and that's something that we still suggest as best practice today, of course in a different way and not quite with this visual representation. But as I look back at some of these older sites, I thought it really was interesting that a lot of the things that were being done then are still being done today. So again, here is another kind of an old school website. Oops, that's a new school website. That again is using the entire browser canvas, but in a very basic way. And I think one of the most interesting things about looking at these old sites is seeing that they really were kind of very straightforward in terms of the information that they were presenting. And that's really a lesson that still rings true today, is that we do need to make sure that we're thinking of the user's needs and what they want. And he's really not burying the content that someone would be looking for on his site here. So from a design perspective, let's dig a little bit more into the types of designs that we saw back in 2001. So Rachel, you're going to recognize this one. Tulane.edu, circa 2001. This is actually the site that we were managing back then. And this is from the Wayback Machine, hence the occasional broken link there. But what we're seeing here is, first of all, a very small footprint. This is, I would imagine, about 600 pixels wide. We're seeing a lot of text as graphics, which means in this a distinguished university as distinctive as New Orleans. That's actually not selectable text. That is built into a JPEG or a GIF, and it just exists on the page as a decorative element, not actually something that could be read by a screen reader or by a search engine. Another interesting thing is the text-only link at the very bottom. So this was something that you might remember was almost always suggested. If someone didn't really have the bandwidth to download imagery, a text-only version of the site was offered so that folks could still get the information they needed, but not have to wait for things to download. Another interesting thing here is that search is listed just as a kind of a link here, and that's really not a best practice we would ever see today. If you're offering search on your homepage, generally the search input is there. You don't want some, if they're your X site, you don't want to have to make them click twice. And so that is the case here, and that was something that that wasn't very possible back then. Rachel, did you have any other nuggets of nostalgia to offer about this layout?
It just, yeah, really brings me back. It was so cumbersome to manage certain aspects of it, because you had to recreate the graphic style if you wanted to change any of those links in either of the side menus, because that was all graphics. So you had to make sure that you had the right PSD file to work with and match the type correctly. And if you didn't do it right, then it looked really weird. Not a good time.
And if I remember correctly, we used Dreamweaver to manage this entire enterprise-wide site. Is that right?
We did, except for the news function. There was a homegrown content management system that managed posting news stories, but for a very basic, and I think it did events too. But the basic content, you're right, we downloaded the file from the server, worked on it on Dreamweaver, and then uploaded it back. And that has implications too, because like the two of us working on something, we didn't even have a good check-in check-out function, And so I don't remember us ever stepping on each other, but that was definitely a possibility as opposed to modern content management systems today.
Definitely, definitely. All right, so let's move on to another site from 2001. And this one makes my eyes hurt a little bit. Things that were very, very common back in 2001. It's very busy. It really is kind of a bulletin board style layout. It has a really traditional footer, which actually, you know, in my research for this, I've realized that the footer really hasn't changed very much. You know, there are a lot of kind of fat footers you see now and mega footers, and this is more of a streamlined one, but essentially it offers a lot of the same information that you would see in a modern day footer. They're using very standard left navigation, and some of the conventions that still exist now are shown here. So the idea that the freshest content is at the top, and there's kind of the beginnings of a feature area you see with the with kind of the women's basketball feature right there. And then also just kind of more tactically, they use the very standard blue underlined links, which as people were beginning to learn how to navigate the internet, that was really a great convention to help people understand when you could click on something and when you couldn't. And actually, that in terms of what's a link and what isn't persists today. In all of our designs, we always run contrast ratios for our link styles versus the rest of the text on a page, so that, you know, if we were using kind of a dark blue against a dark blue link style against a kind of black text, it might be very hard for someone with low vision to be able to determine what is a link and what isn't. And so even today, that's something that we do always try to consider. So next we'll look at NBC.com, which really didn't look that bad to me when I first looked at it. You know, it's very small. It's 700 pixels wide. They have very minimal content. It's mostly promos. I love seeing the Top Gun promo. Super great. Brought me back. And it's using a very standard top navigation bar. You know, that would honestly fly today. I mean, it's not terrible typography, and it tells you what it needs to tell you. And as you're looking up there, the navigation bar, I couldn't quite capture it for the presentation, but there was an animated GIF, and it was actually the NBC turkey. It was over and over and over. So that was a nice flourish that we appreciated back in 2001, and you don't see that as much anymore, but we'll get a little bit to animation and how it's made a comeback a little bit later. So one thing that I thought was great is that they are offering their fresh content here at the top, tonight on NBC. So the next site we'll look at is Walmart in 2001. So this one actually, I had to check the year that I was looking at, because this one really, the new Walmart actually does not look that different. So this is a standard three-column layout. Again, left navigation. Now they're starting to get into, again, feature areas. They are still having kind of a bulletin board layout, which is effective for folks who are selling products like this. But they really are emulating kind of like an insert flyer, you know, that you would see in the newspaper. And so that's kind of where we were at that point in time. We were emulating print more than we were innovating on the web. So here's Microsoft. Microsoft also has a text-only option that I was talking about earlier that was on tulane.edu. There's a ton of navigation here. They're also featuring the last updated time down actually to the minute, which is very, probably too much information, more information than people would want. So one interesting thing about this is that it has a full screen width. So if you were to look at this in the actual browser, all products support search, and Microsoft.com home will slide over as far to the right as your browser is wide. Very awkward layout. But they are, again, using the entire browser canvas, which is something that designers have been trying to figure out how to do effectively, you know, for the past 12 years. And this site did not achieve it. But as we'll look at the updated Microsoft site in a few minutes, they really, over the past 12 years, of course, they've improved their graphics, and most designers now are able to use that full canvas effectively. So now we're going to fast forward to 2013. And the internet is still changing our daily life, and huge milestones are still happening. So It's hard for me to use this example as an alum of the 2012 campaign, but it's true that national politics over the past months have been influenced by the performance of a website. And that's a big deal. As covered in the New York Times, you know, the idea that the president, that the website, that healthcare.gov raises to the level of embarrassing the president is a milestone in terms of how big the internet is in our life. So let's circle back to Tulane.edu today. So a number of enhancements have happened. First of all, one of the best practices that we talk about most frequently is that this site is audience-centric. So you see they're leading with alumni, faculty and staff, students, visitors, and there's also schools and colleges, which is a great wayfinding entry point for many different audiences. It's also integrated with social media, and it's offering high bandwidth video content, which is something that didn't happen 12 years ago. It was just too big and too much. But here, the idea that a video is loaded right on the home page is not as problematic as it was back in 2001. Rachel, any other aspects that you'd like to bring out?
We've modified our design here. If you in our website, a lot of them are still a fixed width design, and this is still fixed width at the moment, but we've changed the background to sort of make it feel like it fills more of the screen, and we'll be launching a responsive design in the next couple of months, I think. Yeah, creating a feeling of openness was really important to us.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's circle back to ESPN. So just a reminder, this is then, this is now. So honestly, it's still pretty busy, and that's partly a function of the content that they're presenting. They're presenting a lot of scores and a lot of kind of headlines in terms of injuries and updates on different types of athletes, but they've done it in a way that feels a little bit better. And part of that is the content hierarchy. So you're seeing a larger feature video here, and then you're seeing some of the smaller items off to the right on the headlines. And that's a very smart choice for them to balance those two types of content, because some folks really are coming to the site just for the headlines, and they want to see a video of what happened in a particular game, whereas other folks are kind of just coming to browse. And so offering both of those entry points right at the top, it probably finds that their audience wants. So we're seeing a more complex nav. And what I would say about this is that over time, users have really come to have a lot more tolerance and a lot more, I guess, being more conversant with kind of the idea that navigation is a part of using the web. And so, you know, there's the top nav right along the top that talks about different editions, different cities. There's a scoreboard, which isn't quite navigation, but you can kind of jump into different types of sports there. And then again, there's the third layer of navigation, and fourth and almost a fifth layer with the top stories and headlines. So in terms of navigation, but again, ESPN as a likely does a lot of testing and knows that all of these links really do get a lot of correct entry points to get to these different for them. They're able to use new content throughout the page. Instead of on the earlier sites, we were seeing mostly fresh content at the top and then a fair amount of static content throughout the rest of the page. But here, again, given the increased focus that institutions in general have given to their digital presences, there are more staff resources, there's more knowledge, and more analytics behind the idea that these properties are very highly trafficked. And so that means that more people are hired to create content. And because of that, their staff resources are able to, you know, get better at using large photos and using different design elements. Head to NVC. So here's the new NVC. This is larger. It's 960 pixels wide, very heavy. So it goes through a number of different images, very, very similar to what's common on almost every streamlined navigation. And nearly all of the content would have been unheard of in 2001, but because that's what NBC does, they know that's what their audiences come to receive, and so that's exactly what they're delivering. And you'll see at the top that the animated GIF is actually replaced by flash ads. And this isn't a webinar that's going to talk too much about Flash, although Flash was a defining piece of software back in 2001. But I do want to say that really the only reason to be using Flash these days is if you are creating online ads and display ads. But Flash is pretty much never the right choice for making a self-contained website or for even using animation on your website anymore. And so that's something that's pretty deprecated and isn't really best practices anymore. So Walmart 2001 and Walmart today. So as you see, it's not terribly different. You know, they really, again, as a really high functioning institution, they have a lot of research behind what works for their customers. So one thing that they're using that isn't visible in this screenshot, but I'm sure that you can go to the site and see yourself, is mega menus, which allow folks to kind of preview where they'd like to go without actually committing to a click. So that's something that that is very common these days and works well for lots of users. The one thing I should note about that is that there is kind of a transitioning understanding of whether that should be a hover state or a click state, because there actually is no such thing as a hover state on a touch device. So whether that's a Windows tablet or an iPad or your phone, there were some technologies and some kind of code snippets at different times that were trying to suss out your intentions by how close your finger was to the screen, but it really wasn't an exact science that is perfectly usable. And so best practices these days is to use a click instead of a hover to expand some of those other content areas or mega menus. That being said, hover states, it is still possible to code your site so that you use hover states on a desktop when someone is not using a touch interface, and then on a touch interface, make that into a click. So there's a way to kind of split that. So this is using heavier imagery. It's still very busy, and it's still organized by promotional category. So I thought that between Walmart and ESPN, it was actually kind of an interesting example of how things haven't really changed all that much. I mean, graphics are better, pages are heavier, and can offer more and can do more in the way of video and animation and things like that. But really, the types of content that are presented are very, very consistent. And Rachel, I don't know if you have any input on that in terms of the types of content that, as a university webmaster, you know, how has that changed over the years, or has it stayed remarkably consistent?
Well, I think people generally look for the same sort of information from an institution like a university. You know, they want to know about majors and departments, and they want to find faculty, and they want to see about campus facilities, and alumni want to find out about events in their area and stuff like that. So I think the types of content that we provide are pretty much the same. The media the social media is a new component. You know, and we produce a lot more content than we did when you and I worked together. You know, we used to publish like a news release once a week or something like that, and we had a daily email that was a paragraph long, you know, and now we're producing 4 or 5 stories a day, and we send out a daily email that lists all of those stories plus upcoming events and photo features and stuff. So the volume that we put on the website on a daily basis is radically ramped up.
That's a great point. It really is about volume. So let's move on to Microsoft. So here we're seeing that they also use mega menus, and again, you can't see it here, but with their streamlined navigation, they offer a lot under the shop, products, download, and support areas. And this is actually a best practice that we recommend to all of our clients, which is the idea that using fewer navigation items allows for a better user experience because it allows for just kind of a less overwhelming way to enter the site. If you are looking at 4 things, it's much easier to make a decision between those 4 things rather than 9 navigation items across the top where you're kind of like, well, it could be here or it could be here. And so streamlined navigation is definitely something that we see a lot and that we recommend. So Microsoft has now lost the last updated text, which is great for everyone. They're using a full screen width. It's pretty beautiful, actually, if you open it up in a large monitor. And the feature area is beautiful. They're using some transparency, and they're using a really inviting photo that's pretty large and very vibrant. And in general, I think that this design is actually really nice. So now we can move on to user expectations and user behavior now in 2013. So there are three categories we're going to look at. So one is smartness, another is speed, and another is content. And so in terms of smartness, I think a good way to enter into understanding our expectations of smartness is to look at the Google search product over time. So if you look at 2001 or 2002, when you put in a keyword, Google could say, hey, would you like to clarify that? And then they would ask, did you mean this? They would also sometimes search for synonyms. And so back in the day, that was very, very, it felt very helpful for Google to kind of ask you a follow-up question and try to understand what you were saying, as you were interacting with the screen. Whereas today, I mean, we are just at a whole different point with Google now, and I'm not sure how many of you all use this, but if I were to look up, maybe a hair salon on my computer, then if I were to look at my phone on the way out to my car, I might see a map that maps me to that salon and tells me how long it would be to get there. And that's a whole different level of predictive knowledge about how I would like to use that service and how Google can actually impact my life. And some people information for Google to start to understand about someone, but on the other hand, when that click comes up and I click yes, navigate please, and Google sees, and of course through my GPS, they're able to see that I actually do travel to that salon. I mean, to them, that is definitely a successful endpoint for their user experience. They really were trying to help me, and in fact, they did. And so it's kind of interesting how much we expect from our, not only websites, but our devices and the apps that are running on our devices. Now, many times we meet with clients, and they start to talk experiences that they want. And, oftentimes those converge around a site like Amazon.com or, another. What we really have to say is, that's great. Amazon.com is a great model. Do you have 20 people who are going to be working full-time on managing the site, testing things, creating things, and also another 15 people in IT who are able to bolster that and build technologies to actually meet the needs of your communication goals? And of course, that's really not always the case, or not usually ever the case in higher ed. But it's worth understanding that some of these techniques to help a site feel smart to the user are still worth pursuing, and some of them aren't really a very heavy lift. So next we'll talk a little bit about speed. And mobile browsing actually is somewhat like using dial-up. And the idea for that device, sites, because of lower bandwidth, are just less responsive. And here we're talking not so much about responsiveness in terms of layout, but responsiveness in terms of page load time. And so, of course, as you all know, response times are very relevant. We're going to talk about this a little bit. The reason for that is because it's something that we need. We need that response. If you're having a conversation with someone and they kind of stare off over your shoulder for 10 seconds, that's not a very satisfying experience. It's not a very satisfying dialogue. And it doesn't feel like a successful communication or a successful interaction. So we project those same types of expectations onto our applications and onto our websites. We want them to respond to us. And again, we want them to understand us and know us. So low bandwidth is still an issue, and this is just because we're all using data networks when we're not on Wi-Fi on our devices, and it can be inconsistent. We can drop a connection as you're looking at a website, and you kind of want to go back to it rather than being shuttled back to the beginning. And then also, as I've talked about a few times here, users are willing to wait, but only to a certain point, and our patience just keeps going down and down and down. And again, to use healthcare.gov as an example, so at the beginning, around launch time, as you guys likely heard, 8 seconds was kind of a wait time that some users were experiencing in terms of kind of getting into the system. And of course, that's unacceptable. It's something that any major site, especially one with that high level of visibility would never aim for. What was remarkable to me about this quotation is that response times are now less than 1 second, but the optimization team is still working really hard to get that down even lower. So this just shows you what an emotional connection we have to responsiveness and speed, and how much it really in terms of design. And just to underscore this one last time, this is a quote from Brad Frost, who is also a thought leader in this area, that performance is about respect. It's about respecting someone's time, and good performance is good design. And I really do believe that. I think that something can look beautiful, but if someone doesn't wait around for it to load, then it really doesn't matter. So after building up how important good performance is, how do you achieve it? And I'm going to borrow some tips from Brad himself, who does a lot of thinking about this. So his recommendations are to, when you're talking about design, when you're talking about building sites, include performance as a goal. It needs to be set out as not, we just want to create a new site that serves our users and looks beautifully and delivers a fast experience. I mean, that really should be a goal fundamentally. And again, I just think it's just amazing how much this is still consistent with 2001. So getting designs into the browser as soon as possible is another must. So we're entering the post-PSD area. And what this means is that instead of designing something static and then just expecting that it'll work perfectly once you code it, playing with that code in the browser and understanding how quickly different design decisions can kind of add up to make a very, very heavy design that actually doesn't perform very well should be part of the design process. And again, another part of that is testing on real devices. So actually looking at your code as you're developing it and looking at it on your phone and on a tablet and understanding how it works. So collaboration is another big part of this, and this means designers and developers talking together and both getting a little bit more conversant with the other's specialty. This is something I tweeted just the other day from a conference, that creative is tech and tech is creative. And there really is a convergence happening right now that you really can't separate how a website looks and how a designer kind of imagines it to be without how it actually performs in its final code state. So, and again, just the designers being more conversant with tech constraints, understanding that using 5 different font faces is heavy. So next, into user behavior. So this is 60 seconds on the internet. So as you can see, there's a ton of not only information consumption happening here, but also information creation. 571 new websites are created, and Flickr, which is all uploaded, user-uploaded photos. There's just a ton of traffic happening there. There's people buying things. There's people connecting with others and pinning things and posting photos, sending emails, etc. So all of this is indicative of a participative culture. And so as users, since 2001, have become more of the authors of the internet, and it's just easier and easier to kind of create your own little slice of the internet, users have higher expectations. And moving on to where those expectations are applied, it's not just to their desktop when they're on their lunch break or when they're paying the bills after dinner. It's also on the television, also on the tablet, also on the smartphone. And a little more information about this, 4.4 hours of our leisure time we spend in front of screens. And so I don't know about you guys, but I'm definitely 9 to 5 on a screen, and I would say that 4.4 is pretty much on target for me. I wake up and I look at one of my devices, and I may check it again as I'm making. I'm definitely sometimes watching TV on my tablet or working on a work presentation on my laptop while I'm watching TV. And so multi-screen reality is something that all of you have firsthand experience with this. So, and the second stat is pretty accurate to me, that 77% of mobile search happens at work or at home, even though a computer may be accessible. And that's so true for me. If I need to look something up, I'm almost always reaching for my phone rather than opening my tablet or walking to get my laptop. It's very rare that to just do a quick internet search would I ever get a device larger than my smartphone. So another interesting thing here is that there's two distinct ways that people move among screens to get stuff done, and that's simultaneously and sequentially. And I think this has really interesting implications in the higher ed world, because sequential usage, we've heard a lot about in moving from one device to another at different times to accomplish a task. So the idea that a student might start an application on their phone and then finish on their laptop, or vice versa, is a really common experience these days. And that's not something that, that would have been true even 5 years ago. So the other type of usage is simultaneous usage, and that's something that likely all of you are familiar with, which is the idea that you're multitasking. You're looking at your phone while you're watching TV, or being on your tablet while you're taking a break at work, etc. So this is actually a quotation from a user who was interviewed about his perspective on different devices. And it's interesting to think about when you're trying to tailor content, when you're trying to tailor all of the things you want your site, why they're using their phone, why they're using their tablet, and why they're using their laptop. And here he's pretty much boiling it down to his phone is his personal device. Whereas his tablet is kind of more of a fun leisure time, or even a research device. And laptop is just all business. So let's get a little bit to some user experience and design interfaces. So I love this quote from my colleague, Doug. The UX is the art of delighting visitors and the science of getting them where they need to go. So just to show a little bit about a site that we launched recently, we attempted to delight and provide a very usable experience with the American University of Paris. And as you can see here, that device or that experience expands across all devices. So I wanted to show just a few really delightful interfaces that I enjoy looking at. Denison is one that I think is really great, and it's using some really updated interfaces. So there's a main feature here, really nice wayfinding detail with telling you which slide you are out of all 5. And then if you notice, there's a sticky nav, which is also a current best practice. It's helping people keep the information they need right where they need it. And so you scroll up, and then if you watch here with the Mulberry House sidebar, you'll also notice that at a certain point that slides up. And then if the user wants it, they can have even more content. So I think that's a really, really nice one. And I'm going to skip a few of these here so that we can get to some other interfaces. But I'll show you Del Val because it's so fun. So one thing I like about this is that it's playful. If you hover there, it makes me want to click on this. And that said, this doesn't detract from these main calls to action right here. So I think in a lot of ways, this is a very successful interface. Oops. So effective navigation experiences. Let's see. Let me show Boston University because it's just so famous. So this is a very small site, as you can see on my large monitor. That said, when you actually do click into these different areas, you'll see a preview of every single area, not only just one of them. And to me, that's a really interesting navigation choice because it allows you to kind of shop where you'd like to go again, without committing to an extra click or an extra page refresh. And then also, they keep their featured content very, very light so that what's really leading the way are these very easily navigable areas up here. All right, and so I do want to show just one or two of these sites that I think are doing kind of the best work, and this is outside of higher ed, but there's some beautiful things happening on sites like Medium. So for example, this is the experience. It's very open. It's very to click on read next. I don't know if you saw that, but instead of doing a whole page refresh, is that article and kind of just moving the page up, which is really a nice interface tip. So anyway, that's kind of an example of how animation is coming back into vogue, because it's a very very small animation, but it's very helpful and it's useful. Okay, so let's move through. So here we go, the slide about animations. So again, Flash is officially deprecated. And there are a lot of animation flourishes that are possible now, and we just showed you some of those with Medium, but you do want to exercise restraint, and I think this is a great example of exercising restraint. This is a beautiful site, again, using the full browser canvas. And what happens is as you scroll, slight animations are occurring that are helpful in telling the story of exactly what types of content you're looking at. And you're also invited to play with it more than anything. It's really kind of a fun way to use animation in a restrained and appropriate way. So just a few more slides. A note about typography. So without going too deeply into it, don't let anyone tell you you have to use a web-safe font anymore. With @FontFace and a number of other technologies, it's very simple to bring in lots and lots of different types of typefaces to fit within your brand. That being said, they're not free, and so you will have to pay for them if you want brand style. But it really, almost every typeface is now available for the web. Strategy. So then to talk about. So the idea of posting a long form or article text, but without some extra attention, that's not a very good experience for the user. So Bostonia does a really nice job, and as you notice, there's some very slight animation here as well. They do a really nice job of creating a really web-first experience with a very long-form article. And even just the small detail of these chords going off to the side creates a much more engaging long column of text. And then some other best practices. Don't get in the way of the actions your users want to take. So the more clicks it takes to reach an action, the higher your visitor fall off will be. And this is different from 2001. In 2001, there was kind of a very strong sense of hierarchy and outline, and you would really dive deeply into a site. And that's not the case anymore. You want to make sure that you're putting the information users want right up front. Content as navigation is actually a really big thing right now. So users know to click headlines. Learn more or any kind of hyperlink text like that really just adds clutter. And then another nice interface is behavior as navigation. So if a user keeps scrolling, they're clearly looking for more content. So give it to them. Oops. That's not the site I was looking for. So you'll notice, you'll see that every once in a while it jumps. There, it just jumped. And a new, essentially following this column over here on the left, but the user is telling you by scrolling. They don't need to click something else. They're telling you that they would like to read more content, and that's better for you and better for the user. All right, so on to our conclusion. As I've referenced a few times throughout this presentation, we really have come full circle in some ways. And as far as key takeaways, I think that there are some enduring best practices that apply to all of the layouts we've seen. So being audience-centric, you want to consider the user's needs before your own needs. You want to deliver a visual experience. And usability does trump visuals. And as a designer, I hate to say that, but it's true. And we didn't see a before and after of 2001 to 2013 of Google.com, but as you all are likely familiar with, it's been pretty much the same homepage for a very, very long time. They've added the Google Doodles for really the utility of the page by in any way burying the search box, which is why they know people actually come to Google.com. So the last takeaway I would offer is to assume your users have limited time and a slow connection to the internet. And always, snappy does trump clever. People don't want to wade through jokes or extra content if they're really looking to have a transaction. So Rachel, are any other takeaways or best practices that you'd like to add to this?
Well, I think, you're alluding to being audience-centric, tracking your analytics is so much more important, I think, than it ever has been, because that's a really good way to get good data about what your users are doing so that you can conform their experience to what they're expecting from you.
Oh, I think that's an amazing point, because you can definitely take the best practices that you hear in this presentation, or that you read in articles on Smashing Mag or across the internet, but your mileage will vary. It does depend on your particular audience and what they're looking for. And so defining your own strategy and using these types of best practices as a kind of a takeoff point, and then using your own analytics to build a more nuanced strategy, I think that's a really, really great insight. Great. All right. Mallory, I think it's you.
Yes, I'm here, and that was excellent. I have a couple favorite tweets that I would like to read out. One comes from Alexandra Reed, who said, "Information architecture, clean graphics, and become the focus of 2013 website." And Tim Nekritz tweeted, "I noticed that 2013 today's sites are more visual." Really liked those tweets, and thanks to everyone who was on the back channel. Sarah Eva, you've got a lot of tweets to go through. We've had a very active back channel today, so this was great. So we'll move into questions, and folks, don't forget, you can tweet questions, you can send them through the question feature, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can verbally ask them while I'm giving you a couple seconds to send us your questions. I will remind you that when you log out, there's a very short exit survey, and your feedback is super valuable because it helps us determine what webinar topics we're going to be offering in the future, and we're actually planning our 2014 webinar schedule right now. So I would say today more than ever, your feedback is extremely important. It also gives our presenters a sense of how they did, and they've taken the time to pull this webinar together, so giving them some feedback is super helpful and very much appreciated. So we do have some questions that I have been gathering. The first one, Sarah Eva, is on content strategy. And this person's wondering if content strategy is different on different types of devices. I think this is a great question. What do you think?
That's a great question. And I would say that referring back to the user who kind of talked about how he uses different devices is a great way to start to think about how to segment your content strategy. So the idea that you're leading with a feature image on a desktop and perhaps on a tablet as well, but maybe on a mobile device where someone's really looking for a little bit more precision in their navigation experience, the feature image doesn't have to be 2 screens tall. Perhaps it should be a much smaller thing and something that someone can dive into if they need to. But leading with some more transactional links and just a little bit more of a precise experience of your site might be a good way, or kind of a good proxy for you to start to think about how to apply different content strategies to different breakpoints. And that's all possible now. It is possible to provide a fairly different experience from device to device. And of course, you don't want to get too much in the weeds there, but there are ways to provide some thoughtful changes and alterations to your site.
So another question is, what do you consider to be the most telling regarding analytics on your site?
Oh, interesting. So in terms of kind of the metrics to look at to really help you make good decisions?
Yeah,
so
that's what they meant, yes.
What I think is really important is to try to connect your analytics to an actual user behavior. So what you're looking at in analytics is kind of a very black and white and statistical representation of someone's thoughts and emotions as they consumed your content. And so you want to always make sure that you're tracking back to that. And so, how many hits you have, or how many page views or page views per visitor, those are all important things. But if you can really start to understand, a person who visits 10 plus pages on my site and then leaves after this page means that perhaps they got the information they wanted on that last page. And so if you can start to kind of develop some user scenarios and some user flows that help you understand how folks are using your site and kind of get you out of your own mindset, I would say that using any metric available to kind of build those scenarios are the metrics that you should really be looking at. That being said, I think time on site, if everyone's only spending 2 seconds on your site, some work to do.
Joe, I see that your hand after this next question. If you didn't mean to have your hand raised and you don't want to verbally ask a question, now's the time to put it down and I will come to you. Oh, there goes the hand. See, that's why I gave her the heads up. All right, so Rachel, I've got a question for you. Curious why Tulane chose an audience-centric navigation rather than a task-based one. Are you not nervous about the visitor's ability to self-identify? This came from one of our attendees.
Well, we do also have a subject-based navigation. I guess it's mostly driven from the fact that our homepage has a lot of different purposes, and if we wanted to isolate particular tasks, I think there would be too many to make the page navigable, because we're not strictly focused on recruiting undergraduates. We're trying to raise money and we're trying to promote certain programs, and I feel like this audience-based methodology is more streamlined visually. And we do repeat a lot of, not repeat the information exactly, but we structure those audience pages in a way that where there's overlap, those individuals can find what they're looking for on whichever page they've self-identified with. So if they're a parent, they'll still see alumni-related information to some extent, because there's certainly a lot of overlap between parents and alumni, and likewise for faculty, staff, and students, because a lot of our staff take courses at Tulane.
Okay. Eric Olson just tweeted, your web content should provoke a change of belief. Your web design should provoke action. And I loved that. And I just had to read it out because I thought that was really smart. So, Sarah Eva, is it necessary to stick to a web smart color palette versus web safe?
I think in today's world that's much less of a concern. I mean, I think when you talk about web smart, what I would read from that is the idea of maintaining correct ratios, so you're not doing kind of light gray text on a slightly lighter gray background, for example. So I think you always do want to prize the user experience and make sure that the colors you're using are not vibrating against each other and do provide for an appropriate ratio in terms of readability. But when you're thinking about a graphic or a color to use, and you're kind of thinking, is this an okay color to use? I really think that's a question we can skip over at this point. I think all colors, all of the, how many was it, 16 million colors that are available on most graphics cards and almost every device. I think we're at a point that more color doesn't cost extra in terms of weight, and that's really good news.
Awesome. A question from Matt. He's wondering if traffic is simultaneous and sequential, is it a negative to have one photo on the desktop and a different photo on your mobile or a tablet device?
Well, that gets to something that kind of I was thinking about when Rachel was talking, which is the idea that you do want to take some steps to tailor your content, but you also want to be consistent, and you want to provide a consistent experience so that if someone is looking at something on the desktop and they know that this particular graphic means that the link they need is right underneath it, if you take that away or if you somehow make it into a more effective mobile graphic, but it isn't related at all to the desktop graphic, then that's not the best experience when it really comes down to it, because it forces the user to actually learn a new visual vocabulary when using your site. And that's never some to try to have a consistent visual vocabulary from device to device so that folks can retain the amount of information and the kind of the learning curve that they've already built up in terms of understanding your interface. But that's a great question. And I think more and more, you know, we think about that a lot when it comes to republishing social feeds on a homepage of a site, because sometimes, you know, if you have something that's worth tweeting about, it's also worth having the leading feature area on your site. And you kind of don't want to have a site that has the same piece of information 4 times. And so I think that that's a little bit relevant to the question you're asking as well. But it's something to be aware of and to be careful of.
And I think this is our last question, unless something else comes through in the next couple minutes here. But Eric Olson tweeted, and this might have just been a thoughtful tweet, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I thought it was a good collection of questions. Is utility the ultimate end game of effective design? Is designing for beauty still a worthy goal, or only beauty that converts?
That is a great question. And, you know, I think that we all determine our own answer for where the line is between design and art. And, you know, with the idea that art is something that doesn't really have to function. It's something that exists purely to provoke us to have a reaction to its aesthetics. And I think that in the case of higher ed websites, you know, if we weren't all looking to recruit more students and get tuition dollars and, you know, pay our faculty and staff and make sure that we have enough money to put into our scholarship funds and et cetera, in order to, you know, meet the larger cultural goal of creating a more informed, more educated public, then I think we could walk that line a little more closely. But I do think that, you know, given that we still have a lot of work to do as a society to have a more well-educated public, erring on the side of utility is not a bad thing.
And I see a few people are asking some questions about whether or not this webinar will be recorded and if people can review the slides again. And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. We are going to, about midweek next week, send out an email that contains a link to both the webinar recording as well as the slides from today's session. So if you're hoping to review anything again, or you want to listen to the session again, we will absolutely be making these resources available to you before we make them available to the public. So thank you so much for joining us today. And oh my, I think we have one more question, and sneaking it in at the last second, Laura, I love it. So this is our last question for the day. What, Sarah Eva, is an average page size?
You know, that's a good question, and it really does differ. So let me follow up directly with Rachel, or not Rachel, I'm sorry, excuse me, with the question asker on that. Yep.
Perfect. Okay, Laura, we will absolutely get you that answer. So anyway, as I was saying, thanks everyone so much for attending today. Please don't forget to fill out that short exit survey. We'll appreciate those 30 seconds that you spend to do that. And I hope that we see many of you next week for our analytics webinar now on information architecture. You can mStoner blog. Just go to mstoner.com/blog and you can find an article advertising that webinar. So wonderful. Sarah Eva, Rachel, you guys were lovely, and the information you shared was so smart and wonderful. Thank you so much. Everyone, thanks for attending, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.